Hello friends, my name is AJ and welcome back to another video. It has been almost 2 months since I have recorded and posted a video, and I do apologize for that. Things got very busy, but I am back and I'm happy to be back, and I do plan to upload much more regularly once again. Once I come up with an upload schedule, I will be posting it probably on the YouTube community tab and other things as well. Today, I'm going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is iOS versus Android development. If you're a beginner, which one should you learn? You could either be a beginner or a student, or you could even be somebody who already has a little bit of coding experience, but you want to get your feet wet into the actual mobile development category. In today's video, I'm going to be comparing iOS development and Android development in 5 major categories. The first one is the market share, which one actually, most people use depending on the location, because that is of course very important, right? If you want to spend time learning something, you generally want to learn something that is usable for many different people. Second, I'll be talking about the programming languages for both iOS and Android development, and I'll be comparing those two, which one is maybe easier to learn and also easier to pick up, as well as which one has a little bit more versatility, even beyond the mobile development spectrum. Third, I'll be talking about the IDEs, or the actual program which you build the apps, and I'll be comparing those two. For Xcode will be the one for iOS, and Android Studio for, of course, Android. Then fourth, I'm going to be talking about the resources available for both of these particular development, iOS development and Android development. Which one has a lot more resources, which one may be easier for beginners to learn and pick up. And fifth, of course, I'm going to be talking about the paywall. How much does it actually cost between iOS development and Android development? And then lastly, I'll conclude on my thoughts. All of these parts will be in a timestamp in the description, as well as on the little play bar. It'll all show up there, so you can skip ahead or skip back if you need to reference a different part of the video at any point in time. All right, everyone, so without further ado, let's get started with number one, which is talking about the market share between iOS and Android. So first off, iOS and Android are the two main mobile operating systems. There may be more, but majority of the users on the planet use either iOS or they use Android. Now, if you compare the two in terms of market share in the United States at least, iOS actually has a little bit of an edge. There are slightly more people using iOS devices than Android devices in the United States. Something like around maybe it's a little bit more than 50%. The number and the graphic will be shown on the screen between iOS and Android for the United States. Now, that particular comparison pretty much ends once you get outside of the United States. If you look at a country such as India in Asia, or you look at a country like Nigeria in Africa, or many countries in South America even, Android is the majority. Majority of people in the world, when you consider all of the world population, a vast majority of those people use Android devices. So for example, if you are trying to reach an audience that is going to be a lot more broader and in many different places, learning Android development may be the way to go. And that is simply because Android devices are generally, again, there are a lot more of them, many different manufacturers make them, and they're generally, of course, more affordable than iOS and kind of the iOS and Apple ecosystem. So a lot of people use Android devices outside of the United States, even in the United States, just by kind of going with one or the other. You're still kind of losing on maybe 40-60% of the country population, and then a vast majority in the overall world population. So, of course, if you compare the two, the winner of this category would definitely be Android. Android is the most versatile and is the most used. Now, of course, you could eventually learn the other version as well, and you could, for example, start off on iOS and then maybe learn and build an Android app, or vice versa. There are also something called cross-platform development, which are using things such as React Native or Flutter. You may have heard these things if you've done a little bit of research. between iOS and Android, and that is something that is also very possible that you could use. However, I am going to be leaving it out of this video, and I may be making a separate video kind of evaluating the different cross-platform options, because there are a good amount of them. For example, I know React Native and Flutter are kind of the main ones. However, you know, the resources for them, the more difficulty, the fact that you're not going to have that kind of device access, like certain features on iOS or Android, you need to actually, you know, use part of the hardware, right? For example, maybe in iOS, trying to think of an example, maybe Face ID, that may be hard to access in something like React Native or Flutter, because cross-platform is pretty much building an app that is being able to be used by both, so that specialization will not be there. That is kind of the thought on cross-platform, why I'm leaving it out of this video. I'm mainly just talking about iOS or Android. But that is, of course, an option to kind of get around that and get your app to a most amount of users as possible. But in the end, of course, when we're talking about the market share, Android definitely wins over iOS here. All right, now the second component that I want to talk about is going to be the programming language. The programming languages for iOS development and the programming language for Android development. Now, there are actually two in each category, and they are kind of similar to each other, and one is a little bit more older and more harder to write, and then there's one that's a little bit newer and easier to write. And we're going to start off with iOS. So iOS, there is an Objective-C and Swift. Those are the two languages. Now, for this particular purposes of this video, I am not going to be counting Objective-C. It is generally a very older language. Now, of course, if you're trying to work in a very large company who's building an iOS app, then they may be still using Objective-C because you know, their app has so much code that it's hard to kind of, you know, convert over to a new language. But for the purposes of this particular comparison, I will be using the Swift programming language. It is newer, it is much easier to write, and there are so many resources to learn it that is the one that I'll be using for the iOS comparison. Now for Android, there are two, and this one gets a little bit more difficult. There is Java, which is a language that has existed for a very long time. In fact, I've taught it even on this channel for AP Computer Science. You can check it out. And then there is Kotlin. So we have Java and Kotlin. Kotlin is the newer, more modern, easier to write language. So it's kind of like how Objective-C is to Swift, how Java is to Kotlin, if you kind of use an analogy there. However, Java is a little bit it's still easier to write than Objective-C, and it's also a lot more used. So Java is a lot more used even in today's apps that people are building in 2020 than, for example, Objective-C is on the iOS side. And kind of choosing between Java and Kotlin is kind of a trade-off because, for example, Java is a little bit more difficult to learn for beginners, but it has a lot more uses and a lot more resources to learn it, compared to Kotlin, which may be easier to learn but has less resources. And if you're trying to do something very specialized, you are going to find yourself getting stuck while trying to learn the languages. And in this case, if I just compare the two, just because of the resources and kind of the ease of programming and the amount of videos and articles and even like posts and documentation on the Swift side for iOS is just significantly better than on the Android side for Kotlin. And if we're comparing Java, Swift is easier to write than Java, so I would say that if you are trying to learn, especially if you have no programming experience at all, the iOS side is going to be a lot better for you than doing the Android side. All right, so third, we're going to be talking about the actual apps that you use to program, or software that you use to actually program these apps on the Android side and on the iOS side. So on the iOS side, programming iOS apps, you're going to be using an app called Xcode. Now, Xcode is only on Apple devices. So you need to pretty much have a Mac computer in order to code an iOS app. You may have heard this before, and that was also going to be in my paywall section of the video and kind of talking about how much the cost of entry for both of these are compared to Android Studio for the Android side, which is going to be on both Mac and Windows. Now, if I just compare the two, I feel like Xcode is a little bit easier to navigate than Android Studio, and there are a little bit less problems in the overall development side on Xcode compared to Android Studio. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that Xcode is perfect at all. There are also a lot of problems with Xcode sometimes. It may crash, it may give you random errors which don't, mean anything. That is, of course, something that happens on Android Studio too. It kind of also depends on what kind of suits your needs a little bit more, and as you're coding, you may actually just find one more intuitive for yourself personally than another one. In my case, of course, because I started iOS development first, I am a lot more comfortable with Xcode than I would be with Android Studio. So that is, of course, something that you're going to have to kind of learn as you go along in terms of which one you may like more. Now, of course, if you don't have any Apple computer at home, then it doesn't even matter because you can't do the iOS development at all because Xcode is not a thing. There is an app called, I believe, AppCode, which is by the same company who makes like other programs such as IntelliJ or PyCharm, other very, very popular coding platforms. I believe the company's JetBrains, and so that you can use on Windows. However, I'm not really sure if you can actually take that app and then post it to the App Store through the AppCode app compared to Xcode. So AppCode is on Apple and on Windows, but it does cost money, and it's by a company known as JetBrains. You can check that out if you kind of want to learn a little bit more, but Xcode is the main and the most recommended IDE to code iOS apps, and the app is also free as well. So in conclusion, when I'm talking about the different IDEs, I would say that it's kind of a toss-up here, but Xcode, I think, has just a little bit of an edge over Android Studio, but of course this one is a little bit harder to compare. Both of them, as you've seen already on the screen, I've kind of showed both of them what they look like. Xcode is a little bit easier to navigate, but it of course doesn't necessarily mean that Android Studio is really bad. Of course, once you choose one, you're going to be spending a lot of time in either of the two apps, and you're going to become a pro after a lot of kind of practicing and coding sessions. You will eventually learn how to navigate both apps very, very easily. All right, so now the fourth component I want to talk about are the resources. What resources are actually available for iOS development and Android development? And, resources is a very, very broad topic. Some people prefer courses, like very structured courses, for example, from websites like edX, Coursera, Skillshare, Udemy. By the way, not sponsored by anybody. I do want to mention that because I know, some of those do sponsorships. So those apps, those websites, a lot of people prefer to learn through a structured course. Like I know Udemy definitely has both Android and iOS courses that people sometimes sign up for and they want to learn that way. In addition to that, other people may like to kind of just read articles. Some people are more, a visual learner, they want to read. So they can easily go, there are a lot of different blogs everywhere. Medium is a great place where people can read about kind of coding and some beginner information as well as some other blogs. And then lastly, another resource which I think is one of the best resources, not just because I'm a creator on this platform, but just in general, is YouTube. YouTube has so many people doing very, very good tutorials for both iOS and Android development, and you're going to be able to kind of look things up, and there are a lot of introductory courses on both Java, Kotlin, Swift, all of that. Any language you want in this particular video that I talked about, you can definitely learn through YouTube. And YouTube is, of course, one of the best resources these days, especially because some of the people who offer courses for free, or kind of these video tutorials for free, do a very, very good job teaching. So that is something that you can also look at. Now, if I just compare kind of what has more resources though, iOS or Android, this also really depends on the programming language. Like Swift, of course, is the main one I'm talking about for iOS development. And Swift, there are just so many resources. Apple's website has little projects and entire walkthroughs of how to do different things. There are so many YouTube videos on Swift. There are so many articles on Swift. There's so many courses on iOS development that you'll pretty much never run out of resources. You'll be able to find a tutorial for literally anything that you want to do, any problem that you even experience. And especially in my case, as I've built apps myself, any problem I ever find, there is somebody out there who is willing to give an answer. And that is something that is very, very useful for beginners. Beginners will especially feel a lot more kind of comfortable in the fact that they can be able to kind of look at something and they know that they're going to be able to kind of get an answer to the problem. They won't be stuck on something and have basically absolutely no support at all. And they will be able to feel that, even if they run into a problem or they're just trying to learn, they're going to be able to do that without any roadblocks. So the iOS side, there are a lot of resources, a vast variety of resources to learn how to build iOS apps. Now, if I compare to Android, this is kind of split because, of course, there are two main languages. There is Java and there is Kotlin. And I myself, I tried to learn a lot of Kotlin. I was trying to kind of work also on some Android projects. And Kotlin has a lot less resources than something like Swift does. And a lot of times when you're looking up, because, a lot of people learn Kotlin because it's the easier language to learn. It's a lot more intuitive. And if you're trying to learn as a beginner and you come across a problem, or let's say you want to do something like connect to Google Play Games, that's an example that I was trying to do, and I could not find an answer to certain problems that just weren't working. A lot of times you look up how to do something and they're all in Java because Java existed for a lot longer and more people use it. And sometimes there are things in Kotlin that you're never going to be able to find Java tutorials on, or kind of vice versa. And being able to translate languages yourself, especially as a beginner, is a very, very hard task to do. And you can ask your own questions, for example, on websites like Stack Overflow, people will surely answer. It is a lot harder to find resources on Kotlin specifically right now. Now, over the last year, a lot of people have been releasing a lot of Kotlin videos and tutorials. There have been even answers to a lot of questions relating to Kotlin, but still, the amount of resources that are available to those learning the Kotlin language is a lot less than a language such as Java. And if we look at Java, Java is a lot more verbose is the word kind of that we use, in the sense that you have to write a lot more stuff. I'm putting this in the most simple terms possible for people who are beginners, and people who have a little bit of programming experience may understand this. The amount of writing you have to do a specific action in Java is just so much more than in any other language, right? For example, the repeat code, certain amount of times, for example, like through, let's say you have a list of items and you want to do an action for every single item inside of that list. In order to do that is generally a lot easier to do it in a language like Kotlin or Swift. Or for example, let's say you want to, I'll give an example here, connect to Game Center or connect to Google Play Games. The code on the Java side is a lot more complicated than something, for example, on the Swift side. Now, of course, it doesn't mean it's impossible. And in fact, if you learn a language like that, if you learn a language like Java, that's actually going to build a lot of skill. You're going to have a lot of skill then, because it'll be a lot easier for you to learn any other language. So that is something that you're going to have to determine. In terms of resources though, if we're just looking overall, iOS definitely wins here, but on Android there are a lot of resources for Java and a little bit less resources for Kotlin. And that's why kind of choosing what language you want to learn for Android is a little bit more difficult. Also, the way that Android does their versions, like because all these different apps or all these different phones are in different versions of Android, for example. Some are on, all these different versions. I forget what the latest is. I think it's, they may be on Android P now or O. I'm not necessarily sure. I forget. However, kind of the differences between all these different versions are very kind of, they're definitely very apparent when you want to do certain things. And another problem is that all these different devices are on different operating systems. Like if you compare to iOS, for example, majority of people will be on, for example, iOS 14 or iOS 13 because almost all the devices can upgrade. However, for Android, for different people, the devices are stuck on different versions, and different manufacturers, it takes them a while to actually release the latest Android version. Like, for example, if you're using one by Google, such as a Pixel or something, you may get the update a lot faster than somebody using some other different manufacturer Android phone. And that, as a developer, as someone building an app, you need to account for that. Because if you want to add a certain feature that's, for example, in a later update, but then only like 30% of the population of Android devices is using that, then you have to somehow make sure that you are either adding that feature also for the later, like for the people who have like a less up-to-date versions, or you need to kind of create a case where, okay, well, if the version is this high, then you need to do something. Otherwise, you don't add that feature. And of course, this is something which is a little bit more difficult because, your choices can be, well, either I restrict my app for only the people on certain operating systems, or, because that obviously cuts down the amount of people your app can be downloaded by, or you need to kind of remove features or tweak features. And that is something that I think is very, very important. I do want to mention, it doesn't really fit necessarily into a category, but that is something that is, that you have to keep in mind. And that does, I guess, fall a little bit into resources, because as you're trying to find different resources for these different kind of operating systems and all these different things, it can get very confusing very quickly if you're not careful and you're trying to learn Android development. All right, everyone, and kind of the last category I wanted to talk about in this list was the paywall and how much it actually costs, the cost to entry for iOS development versus Android development. And this is something which is a little bit unfortunate, I do have to say, because in order to code iOS apps, you need to have you have to have a Mac computer. And a majority of the population uses Windows computers, they don't use Macs. And if you have a Windows and let's say you even have iPhones, like some people have that, right? Where they have iPhone or they have an iPad, like they're all using all the Apple kind of, mobile devices, but then their computer is a Windows, you can't even code really for the iOS development. Now, of course, remember I mentioned there was an app called App Code, which you could technically use, but then when you're doing kind of those more advanced things, or you want to release your app to the App Store, you still can't do that without a Mac computer. So that is something which is a massive paywall. Now, because if you think about this, majority of Apple computers are $800 or more. Now, they did release with the new M1 processor, for example, the Apple Mac Mini. That is a very, very good device if you want to get started with, iOS development and you want to get a computer. You can get the lowest spec one on the M1 and it's still going to perform even better than some of the older Apple counterparts. But that is something that's very unfortunate, because a lot of people, they want to learn iOS development, but then they can't because it costs them so much money to even get into it. And, buying a computer specifically for learning iOS development is very good, but it may be a lot more stressful for you, because you may think that, I bought this now, I definitely need to learn this. And if you're kind of having, if you're kind of struggling or you need to take a break, you may feel, you may have a little bit of problems doing so, especially if you spend a lot of money on a computer. Now, also, in order to even release an app and keep an app on the App Store, you need to be part of the Apple Developer Program, which is $100 a year to be a part of that program and to keep apps on the App Store. That's another thing which is really, it adds even more to that cost to entry for iOS. It's just a lot more. Now, on the Android side, you can use a Mac computer or you can use a Windows computer. Android Studio is available on any. Also, Android devices compared to iOS devices are cheaper. So if you need to test, for example, you need to actually test your app on a physical device before you release it. You can use either the device you own. Let's say you already own an iOS device, you can use that. Or if you own an Android device and use that, you could do so. However, Android devices are also less expensive. So let's say that you want to, test on an Android tablet or something. Of course, there are simulators built into those programs, Android Studio or, Xcode. So you don't really need to do that. However, if you want to, for example, it's a little bit easier to do that on the Android side. And also, when I'm comparing the cost of keeping an app on the App Store, how it was $100 a year for Apple, Android also has kind of only a one-time fee, which is a lot less expensive to have the Android developer equivalent. So in general, the cost, as with many things between the two systems, iOS is a lot more expensive than Android to build apps. Now, this is, again, like I said before, it is more unfortunate, especially for beginners. However, there are some workarounds. And there are things such as getting a kind of a remote desktop for Mac that you could technically do. You could rent one, you could do those different things, but in the end, it's just a lot more difficult and a little bit less, intuitive to do it that way than do it natively on an actual Apple computer. All right, everyone. So this video, I've talked about a lot. I've talked about the different kind of comparisons for iOS development and Android development for people who may be beginners, kind of the programming languages you need to know, the IDEs, what resources are available, how much it costs, as well as the market share between these two different operating systems. And in conclusion here, this could be a easier decision or a harder decision depending on also what you have. For example, if you don't have an Apple computer and you have Windows only and you have like Android devices, then obviously you might as well try Android development. It's very good. You may be able to learn many new skills, which will be very, very useful in the future, and you can have fun doing that as well using the Android development. However, if you have a Mac computer or you have kind of iOS devices, then you can kind of do either of them because you have the ability to do either. And in my case, of course, I would prefer iOS development. I would recommend iOS development, but that's, of course, excluding the paywall factor. If you are, for example, on a tight budget, there's no reason to kind of go toward the iOS side only because of that cost to entry. But in the end, if I put that aside and I just compare what is easier for beginners to learn, which is kind of the title of the video, I would definitely say iOS wins here because the language is easier, there are a lot more resources, and the actual the program which you code in Xcode is a little bit probably more intuitive than Android Studio for beginners and most people. All right, everyone, that was a lot. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments on anything I said in the video or your own opinions about iOS versus Android or your experiences with either for beginners who may want to read a little bit about your experiences, definitely feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to read them. If you liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe for more content. Everyone, thank you for watching and see you all in the next one.